Please welcome to the stage Thomas Apt and Pastor Michael McBride.
Hi, everyone. My name is Thomas Apt. I'm a senior research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School, and I'm here with Pastor Mike, director of the Live Free campaign. And we're here to talk to you about what is simultaneously the most serious and most solvable form of gun violence. Last year, there were approximately 15,500 homicides in the United States. We have a gun violence homicide rate here in the United States that is 25 times higher than other wealthy nations. We don't suffer from this problem equally, although we all bear a burden under it. Homicide is the third leading cause of death for white young men. It's the second leading cause of death for Latino young men, but it's the first leading cause of death for African American young men. And that leading cause of death causes more deaths than the 9 other leading causes combined. Obviously, the costs of these deaths, the suffering caused by these deaths is immeasurable. But when we actually tally up all the indirect and direct socioeconomic costs, they are staggering. A single homicide costs anywhere in the range of $10 to $19 million per homicide. And so this is an extraordinarily important challenge. But we are fortunate that there is a massive body of scientific evidence around this issue, and with some clear signals about what does and doesn't work. So, Pastor Mike, I'll turn to you. Where are the causes for optimism? What do we know can do something about this serious problem?
Well, one of the causes of optimism is that I'm here. Man, this is fascinating. I didn't know this was happening. Y'all having some dope conversations, and I'm just glad to be in the building. I mean, it is indeed a point of fact that the greatest optimism I have, and a number of us have, is we know what works, we know how to implement it, and we know how to scale it if we had the resources and the partnerships with elected leaders and governance officials to do it. Less than half of 1% of a city's population will drive as much as 50 to 60% of the gun-related shootings and homicides in a city. And so if you have 100 shootings in your city that are interpersonally or group-related, it's not because you have 100 people shooting. You have a small number of individuals who are engaging in volume incidents. These strategies that we're talking about that have literally decades of expertise in big cities and small cities, commonly known as ceasefire strategies, but now we talk about like group violence intervention strategies, hospital-based intervention strategies, cure violence, peacemaker fellowships. These strategies are helping us to create a method to the madness, so to speak, a scientific, evaluated approach to reducing gun violence, and this is critical for us, without sending more black and brown loved ones to jail, without putting more police officers in harm's way and at risk, and without having to fight Second Amendment fights around gun control. Now, I'm not saying that, some of us may not care about 1, 2, or 3 of those things, but we are able to remove some of the most tenuous parts of the gun violence conversation and set those aside by using these strategies. That is our greatest optimism in at least half a dozen cities across the country. Within 18 months of implementing these strategies to fidelity, we've seen a 30%, 40%, some places 50% reduction in gun-related shootings and homicides. Any conversation we want to have in the country about reducing gun violence and homicides, these strategies are the way to get there. We can get them done through public health-based interventions, and we got the people to do it. Now we just need the deciders, somebody say amen, to help us get it done. That is optimistic.
That is extremely optimistic. So we have this body of evidence, and in my own book, I try to wrap my arms around the not dozens, but in fact hundreds of quasi-experimental and experimental studies that are talking about many of these strategies. These strategies don't require new legislation. They don't require massive budget hikes. They don't even require massive institutional reform. Yet, they're not scaled.
Right.
Yet they're not in every city. Why not, and what can we do about that?
So this is going to be a little bit of a tense part of my remarks, but just stay with me. I promise we're going to bring you to the promised land, all right? I don't believe they're scaled because, honestly, I don't believe the country sees the death of black males in particular as its responsibility to solve. Just stay with me. The worst conditions of black folk in this country historically are always being responded to by law enforcement being increased or jails being increased. My friend Jeff Brown is here somewhere. We were literally just in the Senate having a hearing, a briefing. Cory Booker and Stephen Horford are helping us to bring a bill up that will hopefully put $90 million or something a year for the next 10 years into this. And Jeff Brown said this so powerfully. Much of the response in our communities has been a containment response, not a healing response, not a restorative response. In our work, we have found that we've had to convince preachers, police, politicians, and prosecutors, all the P's, our favorite P's in the city, right? That these lives are worth saving. We had to convince them that these lives were worth saving. Not that we could save them, but that they were worth saving. We had to convince people that we can't refer to gun offenders caught in violent conflicts as monsters and animals and predators. Who builds a mentorship program for a monster? Who builds a second chance program for an animal? What do you do with monsters? You put them as far away from you as you can and wait for them to die. And so once we've been able to change the way we talk about those caught in these violent conflicts and recover and recapture their humanity, then it becomes easier to have an open heart, an open mind, and imagination to scale this work up. And we've been able to do that in Oakland and in Baton Rouge. Our good friend Hiller Moore down in Baton Rouge has led that work, a prosecutor. We've been able to do that. Our good friend Scott Thompson in Camden, New Jersey, police chief, been able to help do that. We've had various different players in the criminal justice, police, law enforcement community come together and help lead that. And so that has been, I think, our greatest barrier. The ability to humanize, and then most people just don't know about these strategies. But now I think the tide is turning on the knowledge base.
So I want to pick up on something about some of the partners that you talked about. I know your work, and you have not been shy about holding law enforcement officials accountable for abuse and misconduct.
Touch your neighbor, no sir. With consent. Touch your neighbor with consent, but yes.
But at the same time, you do partner with law enforcement when you believe it will help these impacted communities. How do you balance that in this us versus them type of atmosphere that we see so often these days?
So I was trained by Jeff Brown, Eugene Rivers out of the Boston experience. They taught me in the work that part of this strategy helps to do several things. Number one, it deracializes the interactions between police officers and community members, because you have to build a deep collaboration of ownership around public safety that forces us to have to contend with our historical struggles. Then we've also appreciated from a strategic point of view, the wealthiest part of a city is always the general budget. And usually in our cities, overrun with too many shootings and homicides, the largest budget allocation in the city is the police department. As an organizer, it is bad organizing to leave the largest pot of money in your city untouched and trying to scale a program or a set of interventions that is about public safety. And so we know that we've had to, number one, shift police community conversations, deepen collaboration so we can recoup the tax base of our cities. What we're asking for are tax dollars to be repurposed for life-saving interventions. That should come, we believe, from the pots of resources that are in our cities and states and federal levels. And the partnership with policing is important because now we have chiefs advocating. And it's important because, as we've seen in Oakland, when we scale these strategies up, Oakland, just give you a quick snapshot, averaged about 600 shootings for the last 30 years, about 100 or so murders for the last 30 years. Every 6 weeks, averaged officer-involved shooting for the last 30 years. By the second year of our strategy being fully implemented in 2000, after McBride 13-14, our homicides have dropped by 30%. We're in our 5th year. We have had a sustained 50% reduction in gun-related shootings and homicides. Oakland historically has been one of the most violent cities. Our arrests are down by 40%, and we have not had an Oakland police officer shoot, let me just say, more than one person since 2014. So all of these issues that we care about, I'm not saying this strategy is the silver bullet, but the collaboration is the silver bullet. And we believe that we must keep speaking truth to the systems that have become too overzealous in containing black bodies, black communities, poor communities, brown communities, and not seeing our communities as spaces that can be healed and cultivated and included in the decision-making process. I believe in the partnership more than I believe in the conflict.
So I want to go back to something you said about the local dollars, state dollars, and in fact, federal dollars. One of the things that we're talking about today is a federal agenda. So, I really feel like I studied at the foot of Lori Robinson, who is here today, Assistant Attorney General for the Office of Justice Programs. One of the things that Lori always said was that the mission of the Office of Justice Programs was to spur innovation. Mm-hmm. And so what is the federal role here in supporting this type of work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, you want to talk about one of the richest institutions in the world is the federal government. Somebody say amen, right? I mean, there's a lot of money in federal government. I believe that the federal government plays a couple roles. Number one, I believe the federal government's role is to, again, leverage the federal tax base to help scale and implement these strategies at the local and state level. Many of our cities that have these challenges have a very shrinking tax base. They don't have the ability to really jumpstart these strategies without some kind of federal infusing that could be a fixed time, because we don't believe if you do this right that it is an in perpetuity approach. We want to eliminate gun violence in urban communities. We don't want to have a cash cow for people to keep working to do it, right? So to us, we think a fixed investment helps us. Second thing, we believe there has to be a technical assistance apparatus that allows us to be able to have the expertise strategically deployed across the country, so when a city, a mayor, a police chief, community members want to bring these strategies to scale in their city, they don't have to start from scratch. An anecdotal way that I describe this, most people hear our work as we organize across the country, and they take the parts of it that they like. It's kind of like you going to a buffet and you skip the vegetables because the vegetables don't taste good, but you love the gravy and you love the peach cobbler and so you get all of that. The vegetables is the police community work, that's hard work. It's the budget work, that's hard work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Technical assistance allows us to help cities work through those challenging pieces. And then the third thing, it allows states through hopefully U.S. attorneys or other bodies and representatives to start to have an imagination shift on how then their state tax base can replicate the way we are structuring our federal responses. And so we do believe that we have the ability at the federal level to set a standard, And there's a role. It is in resourcing it, creating a technical assistance apparatus, and certainly in creating models that then can be replicable at the local and state level.
Thank you, Pastor Mike.
Hey, my man. Appreciate it.